Hey everybody, I apologize for my voice up front here. I caught laryngitis at the New York Auto Show and I'm still struggling to get over it. But the show must go on, and today we have our hands on the all-new Kia Soul, the third generation of this boxy crossover, hatchback, whatever you want to call it in America. There was a time where boxy vehicles were all the rage in this country, but this is the only one left standing. And for 2020, Kia has doubled down on the things that we love about the Soul and fixed a few things that we didn't. They've increased the cargo capacity in the back, which was already pretty good in the last model, and they have finally done something about the overall fuel efficiency. Full disclosure, before we go any further, I actually own a Soul. I have a 2016 Soul EV. The one in front of me is not the EV model, although that is returning for 2020, albeit late 2020. This model is the new X-Line trim, which is attempting to give the Soul more rugged looks than we've seen in the past. That's because Kia likes to call this a crossover rather than a hatchback. Of course, X-Line does not mean all-wheel drive. This is still front-wheel drive only. With this generation Soul, Kia decided to go in a different design direction, and they've separated the headlamps from the daytime running lamps and the turn signals. This is very similar to what we see going on in Hyundai's latest product line. I'm not a huge fan of this particular look. Now, if you get the most expensive versions of the Soul, then the headlamps actually move back up here because they become LEDs, and the turn signals move down to this location, which makes a lot more sense in my head. The X-Line trim gets fog lamps down here in the model that we're driving, and then we get a slightly more rugged trim to the bottom of the bumper. One thing worth noting is that this is a little bit difficult to clean around, just like we're going to see in the back. The Soul has always been about practicality, and that definitely continues for the new model. They've retained the very square profile that has made the Soul so popular. This square profile really helps improve the overall cargo room and enables you to put much larger things than you might suspect on the inside of the model. But the side profile has been updated, so we now have this little window lit right here. I guess that's what you'd call that. We actually have glass over here and over here, but this section is just plastic with the Soul logo on it. Some folks really hate this particular design, the floating roof look. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. We get slightly more aggressive covers over the wheel arches right there and a little bit more rugged trim down at the bottom because this is the X-Line trim. At 165.2 inches long, this is a little bit longer than the Bolt or the Kona, and a little bit longer than the outgoing Soul. But Kia has actually kept overall size creep to a minimum, so this is still definitely smaller than the Volkswagen Golf, the Mazda CX-3, and the Toyota CHR, even though it actually has more interior room and more interior practicality than any of those three models. Out back, we also see elements that are familiar and definitely elements that are different. The license plate goes down here. We again have some of that rugged trim at the bottom of the bumper, but this does make cleaning it a little bit difficult. It's actually hard to get in that little crevice right there. They've changed the tail lamp modules. LED tail lamps are available, but this model does not have them. And then we still have this distinctive area where there is glass above, a black trim strip, and then a body-colored section right there in the middle. But you can see this is still very vertical out back. When it comes to active safety systems, you'll notice that the Soul can be had with Kia's latest array of active safety systems, including automatic emergency braking, adaptive cruise control, etc. But basically none of these systems are standard on the Soul. That's because of the overall low MSRP on the base trim. A low base price has long been a hallmark of the Soul, and overall pricing is definitely in line with subcompact sedans and subcompact hatchbacks out there. But then the upper end trims definitely compete price-wise with the upper-end trims of the CX-3, the HR-V, etc. An area where the Soul has typically struggled in the past has been overall fuel economy, but that's different for 2020. They've discarded the base engine from last year, and they've given us a new 2-liter engine as standard equipment. This is the same 4-cylinder engine and continuously variable transmission that we find in the new Kia Forte as well. It produces 147 horsepower and 132 pound-feet of torque. Now, if you get the absolute base trim of the Soul, then you do have a 6-speed manual transmission. So if you still want to row your own, that is an option, but you do have to get those lower end trims. If you want something a little bit sportier, we have two different options for you. There's a 1.6-liter turbo. It produces 201 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque. That is mated only to a dual-clutch transmission. And then we have an electric option coming up later this year. That electric alternative produces the same 201 horsepower, but a whopping 291 pound-feet of torque, and that electric version will be the fastest Soul 0 to 60. You'll get the lowest fuel economy if you opt for the 6-speed manual, 27 miles per gallon combined. That bumps up to 29 if you get the 1.6-liter turbo with the dual clutch. And then this one right here is going to be the most efficient, 31 miles per gallon, because this one does have the optional start-stop system. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to give the Soul 9 out of 10 points to 10 out of 10 points, depending on which version you're looking at. As always, remember that these scores are only applicable within the category. And as far as subcompact crossovers or hatchbacks go, these seats are definitely very comfortable, and I really like the upright sitting position that's enabled by the very tall ceiling that we find in the Soul. I have several inches of headroom left. Now, if we get the powered seat available in the Soul, then we get a two-way adjustable lumbar support, which definitely helps out, and we have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion. Something you'll notice immediately about the Soul is the amount of rear seat legroom that we get here. When you take a look at the chart on the side of your screen, you'll see that the only entry in this segment that actually beats the Soul when it comes to combined legroom is the Honda HR-V, but this actually has a more generously sized ceiling. I have probably about 2.5 to 3 inches of headroom left, and the ceiling is very square, and that's a little bit different in the Honda HR-V. The feeling of roominess is definitely something that the Soul has long been known for, and even though this is a hair tighter than the last generation Soul, it still is very roomy. That's really noticeable. If I scoot all the way over to the right side of this vehicle, the front seat's all the way back in its tracks, I still have about 1 inch of legroom left. It's also worth noting that these seats are not as close to the floor as some of the competition, so we have a little bit more thigh support than we find in some of those other options. Again, the whole vehicle has a very upright feel. The rear seats fold flat, but not completely flat, with the bottom of the cargo area in the back. The reason the rear seat backs are not level with the cargo area is because the cargo area in the Soul is very deep. Now, this particular vehicle does not have a roller cover or any cargo cover really back here at all, and it does not have the optional load floor that will raise it up to make it equal to that rear seat back right there. But you can see that I have a 22-inch roller bag back here with all my camera equipment in it, and it is almost completely underneath this opening. The opening itself has actually gotten a little bit larger versus the last generation Soul, I noticed. Now that surprised me a little bit because the overall shape is not quite as square. At over 24 cubic feet, this cargo area is one of the largest in the subcompact crossover or subcompact hatchback segment. And in fact, this is actually larger than some of the compact crossovers out there, which are a step larger than this. In addition to that, underneath this final load floor, we actually have a donut spare tire, something that we don't find in all of the competition. From this angle, you can see that the auxiliary load floor would actually go right about here and would allow you to put about 6 or 7 inches worth of things down there under that load floor, hidden out of view. On the downside, this generation of the Soul, again, no longer has a cargo cover back here, which is something that my generation does have. That means that whatever you put back here, you will be able to see it through these side windows or, of course, the back window. The big thing you'll notice right away on the inside is that we don't have a panoramic moonroof here anymore. In fact, in this model, we don't have a moonroof at all. Kia tells us that they made this change in order to improve the overall rigidity of the Soul. And that is believable because we have that big hatchback there. If we had a big rectangle in the roof, it makes the overall vehicle less rigid. Now, personally, I'm willing to give up a little bit of rigidity to get that panoramic moonroof because that is my favorite feature about the second generation Soul that I own. Over on the passenger side, you can see that we have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger and two-way adjustable headrests. This model has cloth upholstery. You can see we have a gray on black scheme going on there. And then we have doors and a dashboard that are definitely differently styled than the last generation Soul. On the outside, this is still instantly recognizable as a Soul, but a little less so on the inside. Overall materials quality is quite similar to the outgoing model. We do have hard plastics on the doors, except for that armrest right there. And overall materials quality does improve as you work your way on up from the bottom trim on up to the top trim. You also get a few extra features on those top-end trim models. For instance, these speaker grills that light up. That's something that we'd seen in the Soul before. This particular trim does not have that option. Moving over to the passenger side, we have a pretty typically sized glove box for a subcompact vehicle. We were barely able to fit a smaller tablet computer inside, but some of the larger iPads won't fit. Moving over to the middle of the dashboard, we find a center channel speaker right there above everything. It's no longer in a separate module. It's a little better integrated into the dashboard now. And then we have two different infotainment screens. This particular one is the lower end screen. You can see that we have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto in addition to that backup camera display with active lines. And then we have one that is a wide format display that reminds me a lot of some of the mini products available in America. The system runs the same software that we have seen out of Kia for a while. So if we head over to the Kia menu right there, you'll notice that we have the same menu that you've seen in a wide variety of Kia products. Depending on the trim level you get, factory navigation is an option, but we don't have it on the model we're looking at here. Working our way down the dashboard, we have single zone manual climate control in this model. You can get automatic climate control if you want. We then have, if I move the shifter out of the way, a two-tiered storage area. There is an area right up there where I could put a smartphone and leave the cable connected. We then have a single USB input and two 12-volt power ports, and a pretty traditional console shifter right here. There's a sport mode over to the left, push away from the driver for gear up, pull towards the driver for gear down. And then we have some button blanks because this model does not have the complete set of options. So no heated seats, no ventilated seats right here, but we do have a drive mode button that allows us to choose between normal and sport modes. Continuing further on behind that, we have two large cup holders, easily able to accommodate large takeout drinks, and then a pretty typical handbrake. The center console is softly padded and it opens to reveal a moderately sized storage area. You couldn't fit anything like a gallon of milk in there, but maybe a half gallon would fit. On the driver's side, we have an instrument cluster with definitely a very Germanic look to it. We have a monochromatic multifunction display in the middle. Things do get upgraded a little bit depending on which trim level you're looking at. This has pretty basic features: our trip computer information, the status of some of the vehicle's active safety systems, and the ability to change certain vehicle settings. For some reason, you do change vehicle settings right in here rather than in the infotainment system like a lot of other vehicles. The steering wheel in this trim is a round 3-spoke design. We have sport grips up top. And the overall design definitely has changed since the last generation Soul, but we still have round elements on each side. On this side, we find the controls for the cruise control system, as well as a page change button for that multifunction display. We then alter options with this toggle and then click down to enter right in the middle. On this side, we have a very similar button module, and this is used for the infotainment system. We have dedicated phone buttons right there: volume up, down, mute, track forward, backward, mode, and a voice command button. If you're not the biggest fan of continuously variable transmissions, then the Soul is unlikely to change your mind, because this still does behave like a CVT if you're gentle on the throttle. However, if you're a little bit more aggressive, then it will start imitating a stepped automatic transmission. Now, unfortunately, that is not the fastest way to get from 0 to 60. The fastest way to get from 0 to 60 is just to go up to your maximum power band and then just hang out there. And that's probably why I found the 0 to 60 time in this model a little bit disappointing than what I had expected. We clocked 0 to 60 in 8.5 seconds. Now, that definitely drops down if you get the turbocharged model, and this will be down in the mid-6s if you choose the EV. The EV really is the star player now, because in the previous generation, the EV was the slowest version of the Soul, and now it has changed to be the fastest. This CVT actually reminds me a lot of the Honda CVT that we find in the Civic and in the Accord, because it changes ratios a lot faster than the Toyota or the Nissan CVTs. So if we're just cruising along here and then I stab the throttle, we get what feels more like a traditional automatic shift. That may not necessarily get you faster 0 to 60, but it definitely feels more aggressive in passing maneuvers. One thing that some folks will be happy about is that the weak base engine is no longer offered in the Soul, and that option definitely made the Soul feel sluggish. So now everybody's going to get at least this 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. In our braking test, we stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 121 feet, which is pretty good for the subcompact segment, whether we're talking about a subcompact crossover or a subcompact hatchback. When it comes to our overall handling score, the Soul gets an A or a B depending on which version you're talking about. This X-Line version here gets a B. It handles relatively well for a subcompact vehicle, but the overall size and overall height of this vehicle definitely feels obvious out on the road. Now, if you get the turbocharged version of the Soul, then we get wider, grippier tires. That really does help improve the overall handling ability. It actually is going to be one of the faster and one of the better handling subcompacts in America. Out on a rougher road, like the gravel road that we're on right here, the suspension in the Soul is relatively compliant for a very small vehicle like this. But it is important to remember that small vehicles have short wheelbases, and that tends to give you a little bit of a bobblehead feel over especially washboard pavement. That's not unique to the Soul. You'll find that really in any of the subcompact hatches or subcompact crossovers. Now, if you get the turbocharged version of the Soul, then things do firm up a little bit, but one thing that I've always appreciated about the Soul is that the suspension doesn't really get upset over broken pavement. There's a level of polish and refinement in the second and third generation Souls that we didn't necessarily see in the first generation. The suspension in the rear of this model is still a torsion beam, which means it's not an independent suspension, but still does a decent job of handling off-camber situations. In our cabin noise test, this model clocked 72 decibels at 50 miles an hour, making this a little bit quieter than the last generation Soul, something that we had expected. Some of that has to do, I think, with the engine noise, because we get less engine noise out of this 2-liter 4-cylinder than we got out of the previous generation's 4-cylinder engine. But the big win here is overall fuel economy, because over a week of mixed driving, we've been averaging 32 miles per gallon, which is a hair better than the EPA said we should get. And in the previous generation of the Soul, we always averaged at or slightly below what the EPA said we should get, and those EPA ratings were definitely lower than 32 miles per gallon combined. Not everybody is a fan of continuously variable transmissions, but when we're talking about inexpensive vehicles with engines that are not terribly powerful, then they actually are a really good thing to have. When driving in mountainous terrain with the previous generation of the Soul, the transmission would upshift and downshift quite frequently, and you'd get into that cycle climbing a hill where you'd downshift, you'd accelerate, and then it would upshift, and then you'd start slowing down, you'd have to downshift again, dig deeper into the throttle. We don't see that with the continuously variable transmission. It can just vary the ratio as needed, and the overall experience ends up feeling quieter and a little bit more civilized in the cabin. Bottom line, out on the road, Kia didn't reinvent the Soul. Instead, they refined it, and that's actually just fine with me, because the only major problem I had with the previous generation of the Soul was the overall fuel economy, and that's something that has definitely been solved in this generation. In addition, they've also given us slightly better overall acceleration versus the base model, and a slightly quieter cabin. But on the other hand, there was really no way to change the overall small car driving dynamics that we see in the Soul, so that bobble-headed feel is still here, and if that's something that bugs you, you may want to look at something larger.
For 2020, the Soul did get more expensive, and that's important to keep in mind. It now starts at $17,490. That is for the base LX trim with the 6-speed manual transmission. The biggest reason for the cost increase versus 2019 is that we now have the 2-liter engine standard. Previously, there were 3 different engines available in the Kia Soul. This year, there are only 2, the 2-liter naturally aspirated engine and the 1.6-liter turbo. So we get a pretty noticeable power bump in that base model. We also get significantly improved fuel economy, but generally speaking, only if you choose the optional continuously variable transmission. And you'll find that transmission in all of the other trims of the Soul with that 2-liter engine, except for the base model, which again starts with the manual. Key things to know here are that the automatic transmission upgrade in the Soul is a little bit more expensive than some of the other subcompacts in America, and that the base model is still well equipped, even though it does have a manual. So we get Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, a 6-speaker audio system, etc., all in that base trim. When we look at some of the competitors out there, they won't have those smartphone integration features. The bigger change in the Soul's pricing lineup is seen at the very top end of things, where the turbocharged engine has become much more expensive. It's now just under $27,500. That's considerably up from $22,990 for the 2019 model year. The big reason for that here is that the turbocharged model is now only a range-topping model, and it comes better equipped than the base turbo did last year. So in 2019, the turbocharged model came with fewer options than we see in the current model. A lot of those could be added to it, and then you would end up at around the same price that we see in the 2020. So the value proposition is still good in the turbo model, it's just the price of entry has been considerably elevated. Now let's talk about competition. The Soul could be seen as a competitor to both the Honda Fit and the Honda HR-V, just like it could be seen as a competitor to subcompact hatches or sedans out there and subcompact crossovers alike. Let's start out with the Honda Fit. The Fit is a little bit less expensive, starting at just over $16,000. It also gets a manual transmission, but it doesn't get Honda Sensing, which we see in some of the other Honda models, and it doesn't have the smartphone integration features that we find in the Kia. In order to comparably equip the Fit to the Soul, you'd have to jump up into approximately the Sport trim, and at that point it would be a little bit more expensive. For a subcompact vehicle, the Honda Fit is impressively practical. We get a lot of legroom, decent amount of cargo room, high fuel economy, and excellent handling. The Soul has about 50% more cargo room. It has a more spacious rear seat area, especially in the headroom area. The Honda Fit has sort of a circular shaped roof back there in the rear passenger area, and that means that taller folks sitting on the outboard seats will end up bopping their head against the sill. And although the Honda Fit is a little bit more efficient, the Kia Soul is notably more powerful. We get that 2-liter turbocharged engine, which definitely puts out notably more power than we see in the Honda Fit. Overall handling has really improved in the Kia Soul over the years, so although I think it still falls just one step below the Honda Fit in the fun factor, it's pretty darn close in this generation. Overall, the Kia Soul is also a lot fresher looking. The Honda Fit definitely is starting to show its age. It's worth noting that the CVT is a bigger price jump in the Soul than it is in the Honda HR-V. But on the flip side, we do have that much longer warranty on the Kia Soul, and that could be a pretty big deal to shoppers down here in this segment. If that warranty is of value to you, you should know that getting a manufacturer extended warranty or a third-party warranty could cost $1,000 to $1,500 to extend the Honda Fit's warranty to the same length that we see in the Kia Soul. Because of the Soul's odd positioning in the market, it competes not just with the Honda Fit, but also the Honda HR-V. Now, the HR-V is a little bit different because it is available with optional all-wheel drive, and that's not a feature you can get on the Soul. Now, that said, does that feature availability make the HR-V a very different animal to the Soul? Not quite, because most people out there get the HR-V in front-wheel drive, so it's probably not going to make a huge difference for the majority of HR-V shoppers. The HR-V is a different animal than the Honda Fit. It is more expensive. It ends up notably more expensive than the base version of the Soul. The least expensive HR-V in America is $20,520, but it does give you more cargo space than we find in the Fit, pretty much equal to what we see in the 2020 Soul. We also get more power than the base Fit, 141 horsepower, so again, pretty equal to what we find in the Kia. And the interior in the HR-V is notably more premium feeling than what we find in the Fit, yet again, very similar to what we see in the Soul versus that Honda Fit. So in many ways, the HR-V is the more true competitor to the Soul, but the price tag is the next category up. It's definitely firmly in that subcompact crossover category, and that's really the big win for the Soul versus the HR-V. It's the overall value proposition. Depending on exactly how you have the Soul and the HR-V configured, the HR-V could be about $3,000 more expensive, and it still won't have that longer warranty that we find on the Soul. So depending on the value of that particular feature for you, the real-world difference could be about $4,000 or so. It's a pretty big difference. We're talking about cars that are around $20,000 to $22,000. Next up, we have the Nissan Kicks. This is another entry in the so-called subcompact crossover segment, but it doesn't have all-wheel drive available. So does that really make it more like a Kia Soul than a Honda HR-V? You let me know down there in the comment section below. The Kicks comes fairly well equipped with a base price of $18,640, although it has less power than the Soul or the HR-V. On the flip side, Nissan is giving us autonomous emergency braking as a standard feature in the Kicks. That's something that I really appreciate and something that we don't find on the Soul or the HR-V or the Fit in base form. Now, if you want that next level up in terms of feature functionality, you won't find that in the Kicks. So if you want adaptive cruise control, you won't find that there. If you want some of the more luxury-oriented features, more power from the engine, etc., you won't find any of those features available in the Nissan. That's because Nissan is really trying to slice their pie very thinly here. We have the Kicks, then we have the Rogue Sport, then we have the Rogue, then we have the Murano, then we have the Pathfinder. We have a wider variety of vehicles, a larger number of those vehicles than we see in the competition's lineups. So the size variation is a lot finer in the Nissan lineup. Although the Nissan does not have as long of a warranty as we find in the Kia, you should know that overall deals at the Nissan dealer are likely going to be a little bit better. The Kicks also tops out an awful lot less than many of the competition, again because of the number of crossovers that Nissan has in their lineup. Fully loaded, it's going to be right around $22,000 before destination tax, title, and license. That top-end trim isn't terribly expensive. Now, the vehicle doesn't feel as premium as the Honda HR-V or obviously top-end versions of the Kia Soul, but it's still relatively well-equipped. It's fun to drive, very fuel-efficient, and it has the Bose personal audio system, which I find a really interesting twist in this group. The Bose personal audio system adds surround sound speakers, but just for the driver. They're on the headrest behind the driver's head. So it expands the performance of the sound system, but really just for the driver, not the rest of the passengers in the car, although that makes a lot of sense for a vehicle in this price category. Next up, we have the Toyota CHR. Toyota has really been dedicated to active safety lately, and that's why we find their Toyota Safety Sense package on the CHR in all models, including the base version. That includes radar adaptive cruise control, autonomous braking, etc. That's pretty different than we find in every other competitor in this group, because even the Honda HR-V does not have the Honda Sensing System standard. You do have to opt into that. On the downside, aside from the inclusion of that active safety package, the rest of the CHR really does fall behind the newer entries in this group. It's not as roomy on the inside, whether we're talking about passenger room, up front, in the back, the cargo area, etc., versus the Kia Soul or the Honda HR-V. Performance is not as good as some of the newer competitors either. Overall handling ability is good, but again, not quite the same level as some of the better handling options like the Mazda CX-3. Bottom line, it's easy to see why the Kia Soul sells so well. A lot of folks don't realize this, but whether we're talking about the subcompact hatchback segment or the subcompact crossover segment, the Soul is the #1 seller there. In fact, the Soul sells so well that it nearly outsells the Honda HR-V and the Honda Fit put together. The Soul is just an all-around great little box. Some people may be upset that the interior has grown up a little bit for 2020. I do find the interior perhaps a little bit more adult is the best way to describe it, and I do like the cheeky cuteness of the previous generation Soul. But on the other hand, the new model brings with it a whole boatload of refinements and additional features that we haven't seen in the Soul before. We get the newer, larger touchscreen infotainment system available. We get the inclusion of adaptive cruise control in a wider variety of trims. The larger engine is now standard. The CVT really improves overall fuel economy. And there's going to be an upcoming Soul EV as well. The Soul EV should be the most powerful and best performing version of the Soul available in America, interestingly enough. It should beat the 1.6-liter turbocharged engine by about a half second in the 0 to 60 testing. Rather unfortunately, the Soul EV appears to be delayed, so don't expect to see that on dealer lots until about calendar year 2020. Be sure to let me know what you would pick in this segment down there in the comment section below. In the meantime, check out alexonautos.com, facebook.com/alexonautos so you can see what we're driving this week, and you can click up there to the top of your screen if you want to support this channel. I'll see you later.